So, Victoria, welcome to our first virtual event on this podcast, where we're trying to extend the efforts of a cross-disciplinary think tank I founded many years ago, called Kesera, which basically brought together scientists, artists, academic thinkers, sociologists, any various disciplines to reimagine the future and basically address the core questions that we as people ask ourselves, has always asked ourselves and always will ask ourselves.
Yeah.
And seeing that from different disciplines. And so there's no real kind of like, end point saying, oh, we need to come to a conclusion or a point. It's really the value lies in just having an open talk and discussion around a topic. So it's wonderful. We can start with you, Victoria.
Yeah, no, it's great to be here.
And it's going to be these small one-to-one intimate discussions where this is the first one, and then we're going to do a series of these. And I believe that the value in these podcasts probably won't be in one podcast by itself, but it'll be the tapestry it paints over a series of podcasts, is at least what I hope.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it will.
Hope so. And today's topic is about the rethinking capitalism. And I've been very pleased with the talks we've had over the past number of weeks, which resulted in a very good article that you wrote about Wikifactory in Forbes. And I also loved what your own takeaway from those conversations were, which was about, if you really want to do a transformative project or a business, what does it take to do that? And that ties very well into the topic about capitalism. Does capitalism really encourage more systemic ideas, or is it very short-term thinking? But before we go into these topics, maybe you could share a little bit about yourself to our audience.
Yeah, sure. And also just to kind of pick up what you said about, the article, talking with you, after finding out about Wikifactory and when we had the initial conversation, I was so fascinated. And like I said in the article, that you brought up Max Weber as like one of the, when I said why, like I was asking, well, why do you want to do this? And I've never heard any other startup say anything like that, or, any other founder. So,
maybe we should just share what that was, right? Because which was talking about Max Weber, the very famous philosopher and sociologist that talked about the iron cage, that every system is locked into its institutional framework, and if you were to make a change, you need to break this iron cage. And that was the motivation for starting Wikifactory. Exactly as you say, it was not about studying a market niche or looking at specific market opportunities, but really think a bit bigger.
Yeah, and so my story, I'll explain my story in a minute, but it comes, what I love the last year or so, or the last few years getting more into business, is I've been thinking about it's always this thing as a business, you solve problems and you look at that, and then it was always these, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, all these small problems or niche problems, and there's fantastic, a lot of people doing fantastic work, but what I love was you made me think about something I've been thinking about, which is why I want to talk about rethinking capitalism, is like these bigger problems, and can you solve that at a business level, and what that means. So that's why I really enjoyed digging in and writing about Wikifactory and really thinking about that. So thank you for the discussions as well. But I guess to explain what brought me here and brought to our conversation. So I think the pivotal moment for me was, so when I graduated, it was the financial crisis. So I originally studied history and I wanted to go into law. At the time, I was really interested in I guess like justice and fighting for this. But actually I realized when I graduated in the financial crisis, it made me think just how important economics was, and how that can actually shape lives for the better or worse. So I then like went through, tried a few different things, but actually decided I wanted to then go from history to economics. And then I went to the European Parliament after that, and actually managed to work on it was the Committee for the Financial, Economic and Social Crisis. So it was exactly
that's
right
fascinating.
on. It was fascinating. This was like, when everything was happening in Greece, when Europe was going through another crisis. But it really helped me look at that. And then I went on to do a master's in Paris in economic policy. But then there's another side of me. Both of my parents run their own business and they're self-employed, and I've always been interested in business. So I went back into consulting. And then the last few years I started my own company. Okay. Did I freeze a little bit?
I don't think so. I think you are fine.
So, and then the last few years, so I started working on my own company, and then and started writing for Forbes. So I was interested in like from a non-tech female perspective. But then COVID came, and that business ended, and I started a whole new business, which is like inspired by the wall behind me, which was like about urban gardening. So I changed completely, but I really started thinking about the role of kind of business and how business can be a force for good and have a positive social impact. And it's in the last year that I've realized, like bringing together my economics background and my business background, is that actually the core question for me is like how to rethink economics and rethink capitalism, and how we can improve that so that we improve society eventually. But I really think those are the core issues. So that's I think why I was so fascinated with your story and what has brought me here today.
Fantastic. Well, I didn't know about this committee that you mentioned. Actually, now I'm a little bit curious. Could you share maybe some of your learnings from that committee work that you participated in?
It was a while ago, but it was I think, and this actually I think comes back to a question, a core question with capitalism, like what's gone wrong, and why isn't it working? And I think during that time in the European Parliament and looking at the crisis, it was all these questions of like with the financial crisis, how much support should the state give? What support should be given to? Should it be given to companies? Should it be given to people? Right. Should it be given to countries? What's the right kind of, the support? In what way do we intervene? In what way do we let, leave things to work? And then also a question of what's the real impact of when you have like massive banks fail. We looked a lot as well at how that impacts everyday lives. And that was partly why I was there actually, because, I'd gone from graduating previously, you had this idea you could kind of choose what job you wanted, and then graduating and realized that there weren't the jobs there. And even now, I feel so sorry for anyone graduating or coming out now, because I know the job market is just going to be so difficult. And that's part, with a health crisis, which led to economic crisis. So I think those were the core issues that came up, and obviously on a European level as well. But that it helped start the question of what's gone wrong with capitalism actually.
It's interesting that there was it was also the same time. So I have to feed the fire.
Yeah, it's very important. I feel very jealous that I have a fire. I should put on the screen.
So actually, it was around the same time that my co-author and my co-author Adam Arvidsson, who's now a professor at the University in Naples, Adam Arvidsson. It was also about the financial crisis where we published our book, the Ethical Economy, which the tagline was, rethinking the economy after a values crisis. So we call it a values crisis. because the way we interpreted the financial crisis was that the big issue was there was a disconnect between price and value. So basically, what the market is pricing and what we people value, right? And that has become more and more important because I think globally people have become more and more educated, and therefore starting to want more and more meaningful jobs, right, and more meaningful life as such, right? And when suddenly let's say the financial markets or the commercial markets, were still thinking in the old neoliberal way, where this is all just about price competition, right? Make things more effective, like cheaper, and you can get a bigger market. And then just produce products that you then market to people through advertising and commercials, and then they want it, right? Well, that didn't really work anymore, right? Because people actually started to know what they want based on their values, not what a company says that they should want, right? And so suddenly there was this disconnect, which was a much more fundamental, I think, reason behind that crisis that really created a shift. And therefore we saw you could say, because the neoliberal model couldn't capture what capitalism, what value was today, because in that it's all about capital is all about machines, right? Like you invent the assets of production, right? And it's more about productive time. So how much more productivity can you get per hour out of these machines or people working, right? That's the traditional model. But of course now they didn't really capture where value happened today, where it became more intangible, right? So I think 2/3 or more of value created today are based on intangibles. If you look at the market valuation of companies, then the tangible assets is maybe 20% of the market value, right? And therefore we saw suddenly academia trying to figure out, okay, how can we name these new assets? So we saw the rise of social capital, right? Of cultural capital, of human capital, right? And in our book, we introduced something called the ethical capital, but I can explain that later. But that's how we. So it's actually at the same time we decided to write our book, The Ethical Economy. So that's interesting.
No, but so when you talk about intangible value, or like with a concrete case of a company, are you then talking about like brand perception? Is that, or is it like confidence? Is that what you mean by the intangible asset?
Yeah, intangible values is typically captured by the brand. So it's by the brand value and but it's not only brand value, it's also innovation capacity and the networks. But if we take the brand value, that's interesting, right? And this is where we said that the system is broken now, because when 2/3 of a value is intangible and you don't have any way to really measure it, like scientifically measured or accounting wise measuring it. So for example, if you looked at all the companies out there trying to account for brand value, then there would be up to 400 times difference between one company to another company evaluating it. So different metrics, different methodologies to do it. So it's totally irrational how you actually started to price this intangible value. And that was why that market became irrational and crashed at the end, because there's no objective measure for intangible value. It's only the financial markets that set it, right? And that's it. So accounting wise or scientific wise, there's no real agreed measurement of it.
So another thing that I think has gone wrong with capitalism, which I want to kind of bring into that, is I feel that there's this, that I feel there was either a misinterpretation or this myth around the invisible hand. Yes. And that we over rationalized economics. but that like, so actually we kind of thought, oh, we've got to just like, you know, that laissez-faire, leave it to it. But actually what you've said there about, well, you know, if you're supposedly rational but you've got differences, and kind of brings back to this irrationality of how we perceive things. I'm curious what you think about kind of how we or, you know, this idea of the invisible hand, and actually if that's worked or not.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that because in our book we question the invisible hand in terms, because the invisible hand is the price mechanism, right? And that allocates the resources, and we, because there's this new values explosion, you could say, that market mechanism doesn't really make sense so much anymore. So we introduced a term called the general sentiment, and said the general sentiment. General sentiment, saying that probably because of social technologies, you know, for the first time in history, we actually know what people value. Right? I mean, which is a historical feat. I mean, until today, you know, in history, it would always be somebody interpreting what people value, right? Whether it's the church in the old days, you know, or political parties, or the financial markets, right? It's always been an intermediary trying to assess, you know, what is value, right? And for the first time, because of social technologies, we actually do know what people value. Right, we you know, through the likes, you know, through the rating, through the conversations, and all this for the first time. So actually, what we were arguing is like, you know, why don't we have actually something called the general sentiment, where we actually capture how people value the different assets, you know, how people value Apple or value a cultural product as well, because we can actually capture it today. And that's, we claim, is actually a much better valuation system, because it aligns, you know, the price value problem that was before, because it's based on what people themselves feel about this company or this product or this cultural, you know, experience or whatever, right? So there will be no longer a disconnect between price and value. So I think, and we have seen movements in that direction. So for example, I remember some years back, there were some retail shops in London, and I'm not sure that they still do that. But they had the price of the item, and next to it they had the basically the Twitter. I mean the number of likes or Twitter sentiment to it, right? So because that's how shopping happens today, right? It's very much a social validation of a product that makes you buy it. It's not the price itself, right? Because price is starting to, you know, in any case, level out, because there's so much competition, right? So what really makes the buying decision is the social validation, you know, that, you know, your friends like it, or like, you know, this is trendy or cool or whatever. So that is starting. So this general sentiment is starting to guide the allocation of resources, meaning buying decisions, investment decisions, where people want to work, right? So if you're a talent like yourself, you're not just going to a company because they pay you more. You go because, you know, you're aligned to the purpose of that company, or the mission, the values that you stand for. So it's more that sentiment that will now allocate these resources. So that's a new invisible hand, you can say.
And then do you also, you know, in that sense, an invisible hand, what I think as well though is that we do need, I guess, what would we call the market intervention, regulation, whatever you say about it. In that I think, and I'm intrigued by this general sentiment idea, but I'm worried that it's like a new kind of invisible hand, which is also unfair. So do you think that like you'd leave that by itself, or do you still think you'd need kind of government or regulation to come in and shape shape capitalism in some way?
No, I definitely believe that you need an intervention when you want to make like say big infrastructure, projects and more systemic transformations of industries. You need a different horizons. You need a 30-year, 50-year horizons, and this is but this is where there's an institutional problem in Europe, for example, where we are right now. It's always been the issue that governments they're elected like every 4 or 5 years, so their horizon is very short, right? Whereas you actually do need, if you need to have high-speed railworks across Europe, because that makes sense. That's a 30-year project and will cost many billions, right? And not that many politicians want to during their tenure raise taxes in order to fund this, right? And that's an institutional weakness between the political system and the economic system, where when you need to make these transformative projects, it's inherently difficult because of the political system. But I think the response, and the development we've seen in the past decades is then the public-private partnership model. I think, which is the way to make up for that like issue here. So whereby the private interests can co-fund together with government these large infrastructure projects, and that's at least one model, right, to overcome this issue, I believe.
Yeah, no, definitely. I guess is that so. It's interesting. I feel so in terms of capitalism and what's gone wrong. I also though think about is like the social side, yes, the social aspect, which is another important one. And I hadn't really, I have thought about it before, but I haven't thought about that long-term dissonance for a while. And that is certainly an issue. I think. In the UK, we've got this ongoing question of high-speed rail, which is just like always going forward. But I'm also intrigued, and like you said, I think the point is we've all just got lots of questions, and we'll all forever be asking questions, and all we can do is kind of do the best we can answer them in our lifetime, and then hand those questions on to the next generation so they can keep asking and improving. But in terms of on the more social side of what's gone wrong with capitalism, I also think, and I think this kind of maybe ties in with what you said about measuring impact and stuff. Maybe I'm wrong, or kind of general sentiment, but is that we're measuring the wrong thing, and then that also means the wrong incentives are there. So you've kind of got this burst of inequality because we're just focusing on the money, but not necessarily where it is or what it's being spent on, or that it's actually improving well-being or health rather than just the top.
No, absolutely. But that is actually the idea behind the general sentiment, because it's an aggregator, or bottom-up aggregator, so to speak, right? So you care about, let's say, social issues, environmental issues, so that shapes how you value things, right? The companies or public services or what have you, right? So that's your reference, right? So everyone has their various values, right? From which they would like to do their buying decisions or be guided by, and general sentiment, you can say, an aggregate of these values, horizons. So inherently it will have the social aspects, the environmental aspects, the equity, issues, and etc. in it, right? It's already integrated into the index. So, for example, let me give an example. One thought experiment my co-author and I had, and Adam, he's called, actually did it, or did a research project where he worked with, I believe it was Malmö, the Swedish city, Malmö, a municipality, and said, what if instead of when we do, for example, cultural, where the public funds are supporting cultural activities, today, typically it would be a committee, right, of renowned cultural, personalities. The public funds, let's say, is 100 million, right, and they need to decide, people can apply, right, and then they allocate. And they have that maybe a 10-year for 1 year or 2 years, and it get changed. And typically, right, what happens is that it's only a few people again deciding, where, what cultural events are worth supporting, which often happens to be, let's say, Royal Theatre and the ballet, right? Some established names within the art cultural world, that have the track record, and not that many funds goes to the more experimental, like up and coming, artists and etc. So the experiment was saying, well, what if we started allocating these public funds based on general sentiment, meaning that if in a city like Malmö, people just love this street artist. He's not part of institutions. He doesn't have a company registered or anything, right? But people are tweeting about this guy, right? And talking about this guy on Facebook and etc. Says like he's amazing, right? And that starts to count, right? So if compared to how much positive social capital he's building in Malmö compared to a more traditional like art gallery or what have you, right? Then it will be automatically allocated to those cultural projects that actually are creating positive sentiments, right? Where people really feel this is cool, this is really inspiring, and etc. Right? So that's just a thought experiment, and he did some research in Malmö and tested, I think, like a bit there. But of course, politically, it's very difficult to implement because people would like to control funds like this. But I do think as a thought experiment, it does make sense because it enables people who are outside the radar of the traditional institutions to suddenly appear on the radar, because the general sentiment is it's cool what they're doing, right? And therefore should get funding.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love this. I've been looking a lot more into kind of citizens' assemblies and things like that, which I guess is a more structured way of gathering that, or different ways of doing that. And I think, and especially now, I think you're right with like social technologies or technologies. There's a way of gathering sentiment which we couldn't do before, which I think hasn't caught up in politics. And sometimes actually I think about, like when you're developing a tech product, you're kind of looking at the different features that you want to choose. And then you have like, all your customer feedback of what is the most important. And there's all these systems that these tech, or that you probably use of choosing that. But yet, when it comes to policy and politics, that hasn't been implemented of like a kind of a mass, trying to say, what are the most important things to you, or trying to measure what has a real impact. My only
you could say the old way of doing it, and like which is also typically with the General Assembly and etc., is to do petitions, right? So you try to get loads of people to sign a petition, right? And then the politician will suddenly listen, and they might then do something, right, or allocate something. So this is, you could say, just a modern and more smart way of doing petitions, right?
And it's a very good point, and we still have that. But I think almost like there's also this thing of like petitions are almost over, and I think they're great and important, but they're also, what about the everyday life things, that it's just about gathering feedback or thinking about how to implement even smaller policies that build up, but it's something I've thought about for the only thing is, though, with general sentiment and this, and I know I need to read your book. I definitely have to. I admit I haven't yet, but I definitely want to. Yeah, no, it's on my reading list there. But is that when it comes to, you know, like, and I understand maybe what you're saying is like taking it from, you know, different areas of gathering or different ways of gathering general sentiment. But is that there are two things: that when it comes to social media, there's a lot of people, you share the happy sides, but you don't, you know, you hide all of the difficulties, the failures. And you know, and even now during COVID, it's like, you know, where I've lived is seeing so many people who, yeah, I'm horrified by the fact that so many people can't even put food on the table, you know, are just struggling to pay rent, etc., and then find out that there are consultants being paid, you know, so much a day for a government, you know, a government app which isn't even working. But and whatever it is, but there's definite inequality which has been highlighted there. So how do you gather that and make sure that those voices are heard when actually we also in a society that sometimes wants to hide what's going wrong and your failures?
No, absolutely.
But I don't think they're failures. That's a whole different discussion. But
yeah, but I think in the UK there's a very good example, right? With a footballer, it's a Rashford. His name is
Marcus Rashford,
from Man U, I guess. That suddenly took that issue at heart, right, and started to do, because of his massive public profile, managed then to get the government, right, to support. Was it school? It was school meals, right? You know, for
free school meals during the holidays,
during COVID, where they couldn't. So of course, so again, this is another example where again it's general sentiment, right, happening, right? It's now it's a public, you know, a public profile that manages to get his I don't know, hundreds of thousands of followers, right, to gather support around, you know, we need to do something about this, right? And then something is done, right? But the other way is, of course, social entrepreneurship, right? Which I believe in very, very strongly, right? And I think social entrepreneurship is basically becoming the mainstream generally, even for big business. And maybe a bit before we go into this topic, which is basically about the purpose of business, maybe we should have a little drink. So I feel a little bit thirsty now. So I'm gonna pour myself a little glass of wine, if that's okay. I don't know what you feel like.
Of course, I think I'm going to stick with a cup of tea because it's the middle of the day here, although you know, a nice glass of wine sounds lovely.
Great. So excuse me for 5 seconds.
So this cup I got from Sweden, and it was this moment where you get the conversion rate wrong.
Right.
And I stupidly thought it was £1.50, and so my boyfriend was like, "Oh, should we get 2 of them?" I was like, "Let's get 4." And then we walk out, and then I was like, "Oh, that's great." He's like, "Yeah, that cost us £60." You know, I was like,
"Oh God." Yeah.
But so there's very nice mug.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah, so in terms of the purpose of business, I mean, just to build on what I just mentioned, I do feel that there is a shift. It's a shift that has been happening over 30 years, right, at least, or is it 40 years now, where what started as window dressing from big businesses, right, in terms of they needed to show, right, that they cared about, let's say, the environment or social issues, and they started to have the CSR programs, right, that was just basically on the side of the business. It was not really transforming the business itself, but it was something they did on the side, which was more PR and related. It feels now that for most businesses they have transformed and made it their purpose, right? They know that the world has changed and people's people's wants, have changed, and also because the world is so connected now, they have to be able to have an impact in real terms, right? Because otherwise people are too smart now and too connected, right? So it does feel that purpose-driven businesses are the future, and which started with social entrepreneurship, right? Like originally, and now it feels like it's becoming more and more mainstream. But I don't know how we see it.
Yeah, I think what I have been thinking. Well, obviously, I've been thinking a lot about this. This is my new passion, or it's something I think has been a long time. But as a historian, though, I do think that we have had this before. Like, philanthropy is probably what you called it before. And I think about, the great industrialists who built all these towns that had, to make sure that people had access to parks or to like good housing. But I think you're right, though. There has been this trend back in, which was originally window dressing. But then now we've got this series of crises, which really means that actually this is no longer a nice to have. This is like has to change. So whether it's from, the economic, a series of economic crisis and growing inequalities, like even if you look at, the difference of CEO pay. And I think it's in the States, it's like there's a massive difference. About 30 years ago, it was the CEO was only paid about, I think it was 30 times more than the average worker, and now it's like 300 times more. So this talk of inequality is real and has a real impact, and is something which has shifted. So there's a real economic crisis there of kind of this difference. Then there's also the environmental crisis. We're realizing we're getting closer and closer to the point of no return, and a whole new generation are tuned into that, and it's their absolute goal to kind of make sure that we don't we don't wait until it's too late. And now, of course, we've also got the COVID, this health crisis. So I think now, I think you're right that there's a general sentiment in the sense that it's changed from being window dressing to actually new people who find meaning and purpose in what they do, and that's why it's more important not only for people to work there, but to kind of create. And I think there's this push, but also that we have no choice. If businesses don't do something, we'll be in trouble.
I mean, I think the crisis have definitely been a quite key component, because it always raises awareness, and it makes it very real for most people. But I also do think that going back to the dear old Max Weber, to change that iron cage, right? Which is regulations, like the policies, the tools, basically all the aspects that makes up the system does take time, right? So even I mean, let's assume that 30 years ago that companies actually were serious about saying, okay, let's transform our entire production system into a renewable energy led fueled production system. Then simply it was not possible. Back then there was not the innovation, the technology was not there yet. Yes, you could find some windmills here and there and some solar panels, right? But it was not the price or the cost was just too high, right, to make sense, right? Whereas there has been an explosion of innovation over the past, especially the past 20 years, where a lot of these good intentions now actually are feasible, right? So that's also part of the picture, right? That now you can. There's absolutely no excuse, right? Not to switch to renewable energies, because they are as cheap as the fossil fuel led ones. I mean, just to take one example, right? So it's both. I think these crises that create the awareness. It's as you also said, right, that people are much more educated now. They have grown up in a different world, right? So they they expect something else from their lives. And then it's also innovation, right? That we now have the technologies to make it feasible, and also that we're starting, to have some regulation and policies that actually support it. Right? But it's been long time coming, right? And it's only been through this strife for 40 years, right? Of people highlighting the issue, right? and people writing about it, etc. Right? But it takes a long time to change the system, and yeah, I do feel we are on the way.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think what you were talking about there made me think kind of about gosh, too many thoughts. I'm trying to right. I'm right. And you see, I've got a pen. Yeah, I've got a pencil in hand because as I was talking, I was like, I had an old-fashioned pencil to make notes because I was so intrigued. But you're right, I think, and I guess I was thinking about with Wikifactory, as you said, like because of innovation now with what is additive manufacturing or 3D printing, it opens up a whole set of doors, or as you said with renewables or other things as well. But then and I think there's definitely a shift of companies. I think I've got two questions in mind. One is when it comes to a business, should we be looking more at how do we help companies solve these big issues, like yourself? Oh, that's a good fire. That's a very good fire.
That was very effective, huh? It's a little party trick. I mean, this is a little party trick I always do.
Yeah. So while we're discussing the burning issues of today.
Yeah, that's right. Totally.
But should businesses be solving these problems, or should it just be, and I think there should be a mix. I think there should be some that focus more on solving problems and some which should just have more sustainable practices. And then my other question is, do we have the right incentives in place in terms of shareholder value to make more people shift towards social entrepreneurship? What is yours?
Yeah, I mean, I do feel the era of companies that are just focused on consumption, whether it's product consumption or media consumption, eyeball consumption or tactics, is in decline. It feels that there are more companies that now are becoming the new unicorns, that are actually transforming things. One thing is, of course, Wikifactory ourselves, what we're doing, but you can see in the logistics field, for example, there's a lot of startups in the logistics field that are transforming how the logistics sector is running. And so it feels like that today, to succeed, it's not either or, right? It is you use business and demand as the driver for impact. So which is also always a little bit more powerful because it can scale that impact compared to if it was purely philanthropic, for example, right? So I believe these startups are quite strong to drive impact. But for government still plays a very, very big role in infrastructure projects, as I mentioned before. And this is not just about railways, but it can also be about the financial system or the social system or the production system, what have you. The infrastructures behind there. So for example, in the production system, in the area that I'm engaged in, government could play a much bigger role in transforming those industries that are very archaic in its practices today. And the government vision, which came from Germany, is Industry 4.0, right? Saying, okay, we need to now transform Industry 4.0, also transform the production industry and make it much more digitized, and therefore much more flexible, agile, efficient, and etc. And they are giving funds, right? They are supporting manufacturers, to make that transition. So personally, I think Industry 4.0 is not the right way. I mean, it's definitely the road,
right direction.
But as you know, we in Wikifactory believe more adding a social vision to the same, what we call the Internet of Production. So opening up the access to the production system for anyone, right? But no matter whether it's Internet production or Industry 4.0, their government has shown, especially in Germany, have shown, right, that they can play a role in transforming an industry, right? So by giving support and doing a lot of getting the universities do a lot of R&D programs around this concept. And I believe this is what government should do much more proactively around any issue, whether it's the social systems or the financial system, whatever needs to transform. The government should have a vision like Industry 4.0, right? That's a vision for the future. And that's what I feel is lacking from government, and actually having a vision, right? Saying this is direction, right? So for the financial system, if we're transforming that, this is direction, and now we are supporting, encouraging any player, right, to help and support towards that direction, and that's what I feel is the government's role.
And that helps me think about this point as like incentives. So I think and this kind of shareholder value, like this shareholder value is thinking, was that the right thing? But I think what you've made me think about is that yes, for some companies, or for a lot of companies that will have a big shareholders, that does take over in some sense. But actually the key is, I guess, what we've talked about all this time, nothing of this happens in a rational vacuum. It's all about, like whether it's government incentives from, whether it's like grants, whether it's making something easier, whether it's about, as you said, making sure the R&D is there, or whether it's about getting more people or more women to be in STEM technologies or whatever, it then shapes what that vacuum. So I when it comes to shareholder value, I think that's personally, I think that's an archaic way of kind of measuring success of a company.
No, sure.
But I think, I think what you've made me think is that there's so much more, or reminded me there's so much more in shaping the direction of that company, and that governments do play a role, I guess, as do customers. And I guess that comes back to the thing about general sentiment as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess we should stop at this for today. I guess we've been speaking for almost an hour now, and
time has flown. I realized, I just lost track of time.
Absolutely, that's how it goes when you're with spirited people like yourself. So, but this is just one out of many podcasts, and I hope we can, the two of us, can continue the discussions going forward. We are, as you're probably aware of, want to do a number of these podcasts with different topics. Rethinking Capitalism is a very big topic, so we'll definitely have more episodes about this, and it'll be great to continue our discussion. I think we only started our discussion right now.
It's just the surface.
Totally, and but we're also planning to do like exactly the other systems, like rethinking the financial system, or rethinking the production system, rethinking social systems, and etc. So stay tuned, and I hope you'll engage going forward. So
I would love to. Well, first of all, I'm very intrigued into, as you said, this tapestry of what all these different thoughts, and I love that you're bringing together people from different backgrounds, and it reminds me very much of kind of this, French salon discussions, but I think which is all about the enlightenment and realizing that there's many perspectives on one issue. So I'm very excited about that. And if I would love to chat again. As I say, I think we've just touched the surface, so I'm very happy to explore more. But I'm very intrigued to hear what other great conversations you have.
Great, thank you, Victoria.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for any listeners out there. I hope this has been a good start, and looking forward to seeing you in the next episodes. Thank you.